All right, last session of the morning. Here again, we're still talking technology. And so this morning's panel, we have two panelists. This producer panel is about, we've got the data, now what? And originally we had Mark Keating, a producer from the Russell area, as well as Adam Gurr, a farmer and not too far from here as well. But unfortunately, Mark Keating is not able to be with us this morning. He hurt his back last night, and he's under the weather this morning. He was not able to leave the farm. So, fortunately, we were able to drum up in the last hour Eric McLean, a local farmer. Thank you very much, Eric. So I don't have really a bio for you, so I'll maybe let you do that on your own here in a minute or so. So again, this is a panel where we want to talk about, we've got data. Now, what do we do with this information? Like as Christian mentioned before, data is only useful if you can interpret that data and do something, make a decision on it, and so on. So that's what we'll talk about and see what some of these guys have done or are doing to make use of that. So I'll introduce Adam first. And I think Adam has a presentation that will be running, so we'll get him to go first after I do the presentation. And then we'll get into some questioning or turn it over to Eric as well to give us some sense, a little bit of improvisation here this morning, but it'll work out. So Adam Gurr first is a grain producer and on-farm researcher with Agri-Truth Research Incorporated. Oh, so yes. Yeah, I was going to read about Mark here. Sorry. So Adam is a proud husband and father to 4 young children between the ages of 4 and 12. He owns and operates a third-generation small grains farm with his family located just to the east and north of Brandon. In 2015, he started Agri-Truth Research, incorporated with his brother-in-law. They deliver agronomic data generated on farm through a web platform to interested parties, and they can conduct field-scale agronomic research trials under contract to companies in the agriculture industry. Adam has a diploma and degree in agronomy from the University of Manitoba and a master's degree in agronomy from Iowa State University. So Eric, I know Eric. I've worked with Eric on the Ag Days committee, and he's a farmer, seed grower. I don't know about your family. I'll give you 2 minutes to give us a bit of bio about yourself. I think this mic works. Does this other mic work?
Seems to be on. Good morning, everyone. Be gentle. I just got pulled off the street an hour ago, so but I want to give you some consolation that I actually am involved heavily in this topic. I've been doing this stuff since 2006 when John Deere first came out with AMS equipment like that. I farm northwest of town here. We've been family farming since 1900 on the same piece of land, and over 70 years in the pedigreed seed business. And I have 3 children, and my wife and I all run the business together called J.S. Henry Seeds and Ben Leedy Farm. And we farm about 6,500 acres, and everything is AMS and GPS, and big data has been our thing, and we've been analyzing and manipulating the numbers to give us precision maps to put on fertilizer, chemistries, and a lot of other things that Adam will probably talk about here as well. So I got a little bit of background in it, and I've been doing it with different companies off and on for the last, I guess 13 years now, 14 years. So thank you.
Okay, is there a pointer or something I can use? Yeah, gotcha. Okay, right on. Can everyone hear me okay? Good to go? All right, so good morning, everyone, and thanks to Ag Days Committee for giving me the opportunity to come out here and discuss data collection and use on our farm. I think a lot of this stuff related to my background was covered in the introduction, but basically I have a pretty extensive background in agronomy and a real passion for that, and that probably drives some of the testing we do on our farm. I have 4 children aged between 4 and 12, so we've got a pretty busy household, especially this time of year. And, we operate a couple different businesses. The Lost Island Farms is our grain farm located in and around the Brandon area. And then we also operate Agri-Truth Research Incorporated with my brother-in-law Stephen, and we deliver data through a web platform, and we also conduct contract research for interested parties in the industry. So data collection on our farm, when we were asked to participate in this panel, we were given a series of questions to reflect on. And I know for myself, I think one of the things that really drives farm profitability for us is production and achieving high levels of production. And I include that other things being equal. I'm assuming that you got competitive land and equipment costs, and you do as good a job as you can on marketing. And aside from that, we feel that production on our farm is a key driver. And so we're constantly collecting data in order to drive down our unit cost of production, because we also recognize that small gains equal big dollars over time. So I don't want to ignore gains like $5 and $10 per acre. They can seem small and insignificant, in that present year, but when you push those things out over the course of a farming career, these numbers become quite large, especially if you can find a more effective, investment for those dollars. So focus for us is on production data and factors back production. So data related to climate, we've been gathering that over my entire farming career, and that definitely gives us a sort of a background and understanding of how different things play out from year to year. We have an extensive amount of soils data, because that's very important when it comes to production. And then even I include a simple thing like seeding dates in there, because that was something that definitely some of the lessons I learned in university definitely didn't play out the way they should have maybe when I returned to the farm. So one of these things relating to seeding dates, it's a very simple thing to do, but can offer you a great return in how you sequence your seeding operations in the spring. And then other, production-related stuff like variety choice, fertility, fungicides, and other crop inputs. Those are things that we're using data we've generated on our farm in order to guide our decisions on how, when, and where to use those. So our on-farm research program, for those of you who aren't aware of it, it's something we initiated back in about 2012 to answer production-related questions. And it's a very systematic and objective approach to it. We're asking questions relating to production, and we're setting about answering those questions with these on-farm research trials. So it's a very rigorous program. Trials are randomized, replicated, and statistically analyzed, and they're run over multiple seasons if there's a need to do that. In most cases, there is. And some of the questions, it's not like we don't look to outside sources of data. I think in a lot of cases, that's what stimulates or generates the questions we have. And, it could be new ideas just from conversations with other producers. It can even be farmer anecdote that maybe you start formulating these questions. You know what? This is something we're going to test and try and see if there's value on our farm. I'm going to give you 3 sort of different examples of, and it's by no means exhaustive. I'm going to give you an example of, why we do wheat variety trials. I'm going to explain a new phosphorus fertility program we initiated a couple years ago, why we did that, and sort of where we're going with it. And then I'll end up with some protein mapping, like on-farm sensors to analyze protein spatially. So wheat variety trials. When I got out of university and started making these decisions on our farm, our go-to sources of data were crop insurance, so the Yield Manitoba data, and then the Seed Manitoba, like the McVet trials. And there's advantages to both of them, but with regards to crop insurance, I'm looking for a data source that's accurately going to predict how a new variety is going to perform in our system, because I don't want to adopt something or potentially reject something that's going to be of value without, some good data to back it up. So I found that crop insurance data is a very effective predictor of varietal performance in our system. But the problem with crop insurance data is that you don't have, in order for it to be accurate, you need fairly wide scale adoption. You need a fairly significant data set. And because of that, it's not good at, as far as screening out new varieties. And with Seed Manitoba, the small plot trials, that's usually where you're going to have your first exposure to new genetics. And what I found, it was definitely the case in 2009 and 2013, where we adopted a new wheat variety across, on a portion of our acres based on the small plot data, and it just never worked out that way, even when it eventually made its way to crop insurance level adoption. And so those sorts of decisions cost us a lot of money. I don't want to, so another solution to that would maybe just adopt it on a field to begin with, or, small percentage of your acres. We feel that like our own on-farm, like a field scale replicated variety trial is a better way to do that. So what we do is we source new genetics from partnering with seed companies. And usually what they'll do is they'll supply us with the seed in exchange for data because they want to see how these varieties are going to perform on a field scale under intensive management and stuff. So anyway, that's worked really well for us. That's why we conduct our own wheat variety trials. I wouldn't say that would be the case or that there'd be value doing that in all the crops we grow. What I think it is with wheat is that there's enough of a difference in how the small plot wheat is produced, like the management practice, versus on our field scale. There's all sorts of opportunity for different interactions with things like, fungicide use and timing. Could be row spacing, seeding rates, seeding dates. Who knows what all might affect it? But so anyway, that's one thing that we do on our farm, and it's definitely proven to be, probably one of the favorites for AgriTrue subscribers is getting data on these new wheat varieties grown on a field scale. So the next one I'm going to talk about is related to pea fertility. And I don't want you to, there's a lot more slides with regards to this, with this trial. Don't focus on this data that's up here. That's not, it has nothing to do other than the fact that this is part of what stimulates these questions and why we end up testing some of these things. So the data on the left is data out of southwestern Ontario, and it's essentially showing the potential for wheat to respond to background levels or residual levels of soil phosphorus. And so they've made different applications to create different soil test ranges and then measured yield and saw a positive response to that. And then the one on the right is just a peer-reviewed literature that was shared with me from Don Flayton. So anyway, lots of questions were stimulated from the exposure to this data. This is external data sources driving questions on our farm. The problem with the peer-reviewed literature on the right, so that's really the only Western Canadian data that I could come across, and it's 40 to 50 years old, and it's done on wheat and flax at much lower yields. So we have the question as to how the crops grow in today's environment would respond to these background levels of phosphorus fertilizer. And what I'm getting at is, you can make applications, one-time applications of phosphorus fertilizer to bring soil test levels up into an optimum range for crop production. So this is, So anyway, as we were exposed to this data, we have these questions, are our current soil tests phosphorus levels a limiting factor for crop production and profitability? Do our P levels vary much across our landscape? And if so, how much does it vary? We're aware of the fact, just based on historical zone sampling, that definitely phosphorus, like a lot of other, soil fertility numbers, vary across the landscape. And so we sort of had the answer to that question, but we weren't sure as to what the responsive ranges would be on those soil tests. So if we see value in building our soil test P levels with large one-time applications, can we save money with variable rates? So would there be zones across the farm that would be above a range that would be optimum for soil phosphorus, in which case we could skip those applications? So this is Lost Island Farms. That's the name of our farm, and this is soil test P levels going back 18 years. So this is data we've collected, benchmarks, and then we just averaged it across the farm year to year. So a couple of things stick out here. Obviously, as a whole across our farm, we're in a very, we're a low to bordering on very low range for soil phosphorus. So it's probably a limiting factor to crop production. And then the other thing is that our management practices over the last 18 years have had no effect on that value. It's static. Like we apply annual rates of 30 to 45 pounds of phosphorus, and it hasn't increased those levels on average or decreased them. The site we ended up selecting to set this trial up was one of the lower phosphorus level fields on the farm. By no means the lowest, believe it or not. There's only 6.5 ppm, and that was averaged over 15 years on a benchmark. The site has a long history of no-till. It's a productive soil. It's a soil that showed no signs of decline, so it's not like there was a red flag went up and we said, hey, we got to look for some issues here. And what could it be? It's primarily a wheat and canola rotation, especially in the last 10 years. And the reason we selected it is because it's consistently low in soil test P. So we did some zone sampling in the fall of 2017 with Crop Pro Consulting, and they set up these zones, and this was the values. You look at organic matter and phosphorus across that landscape, it varies quite a bit, but again, it doesn't come as a surprise because of the variability that exists in that landscape, just topography-wise. And but a couple of the things that stuck out, I guess, is I was surprised with a field average benchmark site. It was only 6.5 ppm, and yet even the lowest testing zones returned values that were double that. And then we had some that were up to 30, so that's quite high from a soil test standpoint. So in the spring of 2018, we set up this trial, and essentially we went out with our Seed Hawk pre-seed and banded large applications of phosphorus, and we created different treatments. So it was a randomized complete block design. We used 4 replicates, and we did one-time applications of 700 pounds of MAP, 350 pounds of MAP, and then we also had a variable rate treatment, which amounted to about 270 pounds, and that was as recommended by Crop Pro Consulting. And then we just had our regular standard application rate of 35 pounds to use as our check. And we normalized nitrogen across the treatment, so we accounted for nitrogen that was applied with those phosphorus to remove that as a variable. And then we seeded fall or wheat in the spring of 2018. So this slide is just to explain where we come up with those numbers. In that previous slide, I forgot to mention that those flat rates that we come up with, we were targeting a 5 part per million and 10 part per million rise in soil test values to bring it into a more optimum range for crop production. And this is where we got that data. So this is data that was generated locally at Ag Canada by Cindy Grant, and it's unpublished, but essentially tells you that you need about 35 pounds of P2O5 to raise your soil test levels, like in excess of what your crop's going to remove for that season. And so we did 5 times that and 10 times that to come up with these values, and then we had the variable rate treatment as well. This was the first year yield and protein data. So you can see that, this response was substantial. I've been doing on-farm research for a lot of years, and it's not often that we get a response of that magnitude. And so that was first year in 2018. We collected data again this year in canola. You can access that data on our website. Subscribers have access to that. But anyway, in year 2, essentially, we saw not that magnitude of response in canola, but we definitely saw the response again. And the whole idea with fertilizing to raise soil test levels, that investment that you make in phosphorus should pay dividends far out into the future. And the data, like the peer-reviewed literature I showed there, they were able to measure it for 8 years after that initial application. So we're hoping that, because of how large the response was in the first season, you essentially paid for that 350-pound application of MAP just with additional wheat yield. And the other thing of note there, to me anyway, was the protein percentage, because it's not often that you see a yield spread of up to 20 bushels per acre and only 0.5 in protein. Or in the case of the 350-pound one, that's 14, 15 bushels per acre of wheat and essentially the same protein. So you've really enhanced nitrogen use efficiency because it was the same nitrogen rates were applied to the plots. So this is some other soil testing we did. So this is soil test P levels on a Newdale soils by zone. So this was 4 additional fields we did that fall. And if we're ultimately, this is leading towards us making this relatively large investment in phosphorus, we want to we don't want to be spending it or making that investment where we don't need it. So we're going to we'll be zone sampling all the fields and coming up with prescription maps likely based on that to try and do this. And it's data like this that gets you comfortable with that, because obviously there's zones in every field that don't require those applications. And there's a 5th field, for some reason it's not in here, but out of 480 acres, there was only about 100 acres that required supplemental phosphorus applications to raise soil test levels. So that's a huge savings on there versus just going with a flat rate application, even based on a benchmark, because I know the benchmark for those fields where those values were all relatively really high, those soil test levels are still probably in the low range. So if you had based a one-time application off of that single benchmark, you really would have spent a lot more money than you need to. So I'm going to finish off with this discussion about protein sensors. So this is a new source of data that we have access to on the farm. We installed this on one of our combines in the fall of 2017. And this this slide was shared by CropScan, but anyway, it's a near-infrared on-combine grain analyzer. It uses similar technology to what would measure protein, moisture, and oil and that in the elevator systems, but it allows us to measure that, that value across a landscape. And I know 20 years ago when I got out of university, I thought, so there's yield maps back then, but I was like, that'd be really cool if we could get protein maps. And there was somebody working on it at the time, but for some reason they gave up on it. But since then, I guess maybe the cost to create this technology has come down and someone else has come out with it. But anyway, a lot of sample points across the field. But then what do you do with that? I know for us, one of the things it does for us is it simplifies data collection for some of our on-farm trials. But ultimately, we want to be able to create maps like this. So what this is a multi-year protein distribution map in spring wheat. So essentially, we've gathered protein data on some of these fields for 2 years now, and we're able to create like an average map of protein distribution. In this case, it was in spring wheat. So keep it in mind that protein in wheat is an indicator of nitrogen sufficiency. So you can use that protein value to give you an idea as to whether you've fertilized enough or applied enough nitrogen to maximize yield and to capture the protein premium. So in the case of this map, I mean, this was 2 years of high yield, like the first year was 95 and the second year was 75. And these are 130 pounds of nitrogen at seeding applied flat rate. And this was on dry bean grounds, which typically has high residual levels. But in spite of that, you could argue that 65% of it based off of this map was under-fertilized, and there might have been an opportunity to not only capture more yield, but the protein premium that might go along with that. So for us, as we continue to gather this sort of history on our fields, we're hoping that it'll potentially guide in-season applications of nitrogen, not so much to post-anthesis, just to get protein, but we want to be able to apply it soon enough so that we maximize yield. And this is another example of a use of that map. So this map was created by Next Instruments with that data, and this is on a field in 2017 up in the Rapid City area. And essentially, so what I learned from this, I know when we originally created the data, like we had our yield map and protein map, and if you created a yield map with about 4 different ranges of yield, it would look pretty uniform. I'm just gonna. So it would look, where's the pointer on this? Is it top? Okay, yeah. So you can see over here the data points. So what they did was they created a quadrant map here, and they have high yield, low protein, high yield, high protein, then low yield, high protein, low yield, low protein. And a couple of things we learned from this, if you were to ask me ahead of time, like what would you expect? Would your high yielding areas be your highest protein, or would it be your lowest protein? I would have guessed lowest protein, but that wasn't always the case. And there was like a fairly significant portion of the landscape that was high yield and high protein, but it was similar yield between the high and low protein, which you would never, without a protein map, you wouldn't know that that's going on out there. You just get your average for the field. So it suggests to me, a couple things. It's probably an indicator of mineralizable N potential across a landscape when you can measure protein like this, especially when you get a similar yield. I'm thinking that where it was high protein, there might have been more nitrogen released for whatever reason later in the season that was taken up to add to protein. But those ranges weren't insignificant. Like it was up to 2 points difference and a very comparable yield. So I think in theory, I guess with history, again, with data like this, we have the potential to manage nitrogen in season to help to maximize yield and protein on these varieties. And so the last thing we were asked, like one of the questions we were left with was, what do you want to see in regards to data collection on your farm? And I know for myself, I think it would be really nice if we could, first of all, factory install protein sensors that were fully integrated into the manufacturer's platform. I don't want to necessarily go out and buy that aftermarket and stick it on my combine, pull it off, stick it on the next combine. It would just be nice if it was like yield monitors where they're sold on every new combine. Accurate moisture sensors. The moisture sensor on this crop scan unit is very accurate over a wide range of moisture contents. And that's something that became apparent in the, as we start to harvest more spring wheat that's not pre-harvested, and you get quite a range of moisture contents out there. And the moisture content, or the moisture sensor, the standard one that would come on the combine, was quite inaccurate over a wide range, whereas the one with this near infrared one was quite accurate. So that's going to feed back into yield correction on your yield maps, and enhancing the quality of that data. And then I would like to see accurate yield monitors like a scale. I'm not comfortable with that right now. It would allow us to increase the scale and complexity of our current research program. And I think it would allow us to do a lot of data collection passively. And, we have the ability to do that right now, but I'm just not comfortable with the quality of that data. And ultimately, that data is going to feed into decisions that we make on our farm. So I want it to be of, the utmost quality. And I also want to simplify the process. So I think all of those would contribute to that.
Thank you, Adam and Eric, again for doing this. So what we wanted to do this morning with this panel was to see what some producers, so what do they actually collect for data, and what maybe they don't collect for data, what they find useful, not so useful. So I had asked, or Mark was supposed to talk about, and again, he can't be here this morning, was supposed to talk about some of the basics of data collection. And Adam was, again, as he did, he was to talk about some specific examples on how data collection on his farm has been happening. So I know, Eric, you don't have a presentation. So I think we have about another 10-15 minutes here. So we'll carry on with questions that I will ask to both panelists here to see if they can answer some. And I'd submitted those questions to Adam and Mark before, and hopefully you'll be able to swing it here, Eric. So, and again, I'm going to be looking for some questions from the audience as well here to see what some of the questions you might have. One of the questions I had here was, okay, I guess Adam, I'll ask this one. For what kind of services do you subscribe to in order to assist you in collecting and interpreting data? Can we have the microphone on now?
Is that on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I know on our farm for years we've subscribed to just Ag Leader SMS because it allows us to bring in, machine-generated data like yield monitor, protein maps, stuff done with sprayer or whatever, when we applied maps that we set up in season if we want to safeguard those and have them stored and potentially analyze them down the road. That's just a software program. It's simple to use. And then we've subscribed to various data platforms over the years, but I just haven't really come across anything yet that I see of value is with regards to automating all that data collection. Like, I think we're a small enough farm, it's pretty simple to go in with the USB and pop it in there and put it on my computer.
Sounds good. What about Eric?
Very similar in some ways. Like I alluded to in a brief introduction, at our farm, we jumped in with John Deere AMS back in 2006 and evolved with that platform of that equipment through different machinery purchases through the last 14 years. And I have extensively utilized the Apex program and the John Deere platform for all that time. It was the basic tool. I agree with Adam. I think the Ag Leader one was probably better because it allows for multiple intakes of multiple platforms, different colors, machinery, all kinds of things through USB stuff. For us, it was simple. We have all green stuff. It was easy to do. And utilizing that was the best. When we did our thing, we were able to utilize the platform from every operation through in a field sense. So we started at a harvest, moved to an anhydrous applicator for fertility, moved to spring seeding in the drill, and then moved into the sprayer in the season, utilizing variable rate technology through the whole thing because we could. And that has been able to allow us to capture a lot of value through the years. Now, as programs move along, there's been a lot of upgrade through the last recent generations of programs, and that's where it starts to get more complicated for producers to look through this stuff. I'm cynically on board with Adam in the same respect that I don't see the real value of real-time uploading of machines and data. I don't have time to sit and analyze stuff in the cab of the truck while the combines are rolling in the field and everything else. So maybe that's just me being cynic. But if you do, fantastic. We also have Climate Field View that we use, is what we use as a platform of a newer generation. And it's very easy to use, and it's iPad driven. And as a separate source in the cab, originally I liked using one control program and one monitor, and I didn't like to have any more glare in the cab at night. But having that extra monitor completely dedicated to recording this particular set of data while the other one can do this data set and run other functions is kind of nice to have. As long as everybody remembers how to take the glare down and take the brightness down, it's all good. So we've been using those two in conjunction with each other. And I got to say, they're both very easy for me to use because I have the experience with one, but the other one, being a newer platform, has been fairly easy to take up for in terms of how to generate variable rate prescriptions, whether it be for fertility, chemistries, or other things like that. So
that's amazing. Great. Is it just me, but you guys speak awfully fast, I find. Hopefully you guys can all hear and understand properly. I think the microphone's working well here. A quick question here. Another one here. What data do you currently collect that makes the most sense and biggest difference on your farm operation? You know, we can collect all kinds of data, but what makes the most sense and again, biggest difference that you can use that information basically and convert it into good decision making?
You know, take a page out of the previous speaker. Obviously, financial data is the first one, and I'm not going to argue with Christian. Nobody can argue with Christian, that's for sure. The second one I always think is yield mapping, because it's one of the easiest and the most prolific to get a hold of, because all combines usually have some form of that, whether it's the last 15 years, generations of combines. So that's what we use. We start with yield maps, and we've evolved to the point now where we don't necessarily obtain the best data that we can on wheat or cereal crops in general, and even canola crops can be a little sketchy because we run 3 units in the field. So we get really crappy, you know, calibrated yield monitors. Things can happen. But what we found that we do get good data set from is from when we're doing soybeans and pulse crops, like peas, soybeans in general, really good for us because those are crops that don't actually have a lot of nutrient provided. They're crops that take what they can from the soil, like i.e. with soybeans, they will have a certain amount of phosphate whether you applied in preseason or with seed, but you will have no nitrogen base. So your crop will respond basically on the moisture that's been given and the soil underneath it and the environment that's been grown in. And when we've done comparisons over time using EC mapping that we've done in the past and comparing yield maps from pulse crops, the two almost marry together perfectly. So it's a good cheat in terms of being able to save a little bit of money and not doing your whole farm EC or doing other things, and being able to say, on my third year rotation on my pulse crops and my soybean acres, I can get a really good baseline every 3 years on where my soil's been performing, and I can go with that. And that's based on the yield monitor. And I can take the yield maps from that and quickly convert them into prescription variable rate maps for fertility, do a lot of different things based on growth habit to be able to fertilize for my next year's wheat crop. And there, vis-a-vis, we can reuse these maps over and over again. Soil doesn't change a lot in a lot of ways. Electrical conductivity is also very, very stable, and the salt content in your soils can be the same way. So if we can map those things in conjunction in a trio, we can come up with a really good baseline field without having to incur a lot of consultant costs if you didn't need to do it. So it's a good place to start for me, and that's where our farm is.
Yeah, I guess like aside from economic data, the biggest one, hands down, for us is just like I mentioned in the presentation, is production-related data. And specifically, when I say production-related data, it'd be more the data we're generating through our on-farm research program, because it's really driving system change for us. Like, it's definitely moved us towards cutting out certain things or reinvesting elsewhere. And I think it just works well. I mean, you're using the scientific method to advance your cropping system, ultimately lower our cost per unit, and that's the best way I've found of doing that to date. It might change in the future, but so far that's what we're going to stick with.
Sounds good. Another question relating to that here is, what data do you consider important but not able to collect on your farm? Or is there a piece of information, some data that you would like to collect, that you would like to know on your farm, that you're not able to collect? And what is the problem for not collecting this data, and what difference do you think it would make? I don't know if you can answer that question.
Yeah, I think like prior to the protein, like before protein sensors, that was one layer of data that I definitely wanted to collect, but we have access to that now. I think for us, like when I was reflecting on this question, it would be new types of data that I'm hoping to collect in the future. One of them would be anything with regards to like weeds and their distribution in the landscape and their their relative abundance and their species and that. And I think at some point we'll be able to do that with the technology that's coming down the line, because that would definitely influence the way we manage, probably cut a lot of costs out of how we manage weeds if I can site specifically target certain ones, or easily come up with like wild oat distribution maps that would really cut the cost of pre-plant incorporated herbicides and fight with weed resistance, I think, ultimately. And then even so anyway, that would be a big one for us if we could collect that data effectively, like, and it actually works. Then that's something we're going to be investing in.
That's a tough one. I don't. One of the things, a lot of times when I get a wish list, it's very anecdotal, and it usually has to be solved within the realm of the information that I can get. And I think that's where I would like to go with that, is just to see how data can be manipulated and be able to interpret it. And that's what a lot of companies are trying to offer in that terms of that service. But I think we can see a lot through that. Like in terms of things that always are on point of mind for me are always mapping our salty zones and our salinity spots in our fields. And a lot of it's done with the fact that I know that when I'm driving into that bad spot, I know I should shut off the fertilizer, we should do different things. And so that's where my horizon usually revolves around. A lot of the time, simplicity says you don't do that, because you're applying, you're running your drill, you maybe have somebody running your equipment. So it's about trying to focus on building the right prescription map so that when you get in there, you can trust the fact that it's going to turn on at the right place. And I don't have a big wish list like that, because I'm still trying to interpret the big things. One of my biggest frustrations is how we're always inundated with new cutting-edge products that are supposed to make everything better, and yet there's no production data on these things. There's nothing that's out there that says they're going to help you at all, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about, but yet you're being told that you need to have these things. And I really appreciate things like what Adam's doing here, where he's trying to test that theorem in his on-scale, large-scale replicated trials anyways. So everything's an evolution. I don't have a big wish list. I just know it's going to be next year. It'll be something new.
Okay. I want to turn it to the audience, see if we have a couple of questions maybe from the audience, because we're going to wrap it up in about 5 minutes. What's that? Oh, sorry. Yes.
In that example there, we just use...
Just repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. So
sure.
The gentleman was asking what sort of data or what program we use to create the management zones in the field. Is that right? Kind of, yeah. Yeah, what data? I guess we just use, in that case, we use Crop Pro Consulting. So they have their patented SWOT map system, and they measure elevation and salinity and stuff like that, and then base their zones off of that. And so we were just using them, and so whatever they come up with, that's what we used. And yeah, so did that answer the question? Yeah, it was just like, can you guys create a zone map for us? Yep. So they went out and did all the sampling, and then we just used that to help set up the trial.
Any other question? Yes, at the front. Speak loud, so then we'll repeat the question. Yeah, so the question is if there's any data collected in the past that may be found to be relevant today that doesn't need to be collected again, correct? Yeah. Go ahead.
A lot of it revolves around soil analysis. So in the beginning, we had Farmers Edge do a lot of our pre-work, and a lot of it was based on soil analysis that was based on vegetative mapping on historical years of imagery, right? And then they started looking at every nutrient load that you could possibly look at. And variable rate was cool, and there's 3 meters on the drill, so you could do some cool things in putting down everything. And really, the big thing was sulfur was one of the ones that never really resonated, that it responds to variable rate very much. So that's an easy one for me. So we can easily say that, yeah, I mean, if you're putting down your amounts for your fields and you're looking at your comparison of what you want to do in your canola prescription, phosphate is really important, obviously, and sulfur seems to be very static. It's nice to put down a good known quantity, avoid your bad spots, but really the sulfur was one of the ones we kind of kicked out on the realm of it. I don't do a lot of variable rate with phosphate anymore, but I do like to shut it off and on where I know that it's not going to do any good. Salinity lowland spots have We had done some work with Manitoba Ag years ago, and they did an exposition pit where they dug, and down 10, 15 feet. And maybe you guys have been privy to some of these things through your educational processes, but they show the horizon layers of the soil. And by the time that you get down into compacted salinity soil, you've got probably 10 feet of black topsoil that is so nutrient rich but can't be exposed to anything. There's no point in putting anything on. So I really do criticize the idea that we all should be doing better at turning the meters off when we're going through those really crappy spots, because you're absolutely wasting your time on that. So those are the two things that resonate with me.
I guess one of the things that, on our farm, I guess, I continue to collect it because it's easy to do, but yield monitor data, like I've been collecting it since 2007, and I just don't really have much use for it. We've experimented with, currently anyway, like I mentioned it in the last slide there, once it gets more accurate, then it would definitely become an important part of how we do things. But currently, I pull these maps off every year and I pop them in there, and we're collecting our data with scales, so it's more accurate for our field scale research trials. And then other stuff beyond that, I don't really, like I've created multi-year yield maps, and you look at it and I'm like, but I don't know I have no use for it. But like I collect it, but that would be something, I don't know, that's just something that come to mind, I guess. Maybe in the future, so I continue to collect it.
Does that answer your question? Perfect, thank you. I think our time is just about up. One last question to each of you, and we'll wrap it up after that. So the question is, how do you envision data? And this is actually from Mark Keating. He can't be here today, but that's one of the questions he thought could be discussed. How do you envision data being used on your farm in the future?
Well, that's similar to one of the other questions we had there, and I think back to once there's new types of data we can collect, and I'm speaking with regards to weeds, and it would definitely change how we manage them. So if I had that data, it would change how I go about controlling my weeds. But other than that, I can't really think of anything.
Like the previous speaker, I'm an economist by nature, and so I always look back at tying everything to economic indicators. So for me, it would be being able to have the symmetry to tie the data collection points in the programs back into your accounting software to be able to see how each field, each zone was responding like that, and seeing how it could kick it out. Like right now, it's a lot of data. So we're still looking at things field by field, area by area, other things like that. But to be able to look back and say, yeah, you know what, field 16 is not performing very good. Things can happen, changes your decision-making matrix, maybe changes the way that your cropping rotation would work around things in that. And that's really what we're going to have to go into. It's nice when everybody's making money, but when the things start to get pinched, then things are going to have to start changing in terms of what we focus on and how we do it.
Sounds good. I think our time is up here. I want to give a good hand of applause here for our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Again, there's a sign-up sheet for CCA credits at the top there on the table. Again, thank you for being here, and we'll continue the program here this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Thank you.